I drove 7 hours through a thunderstorm with stiff hands and a lemon chiffon cake in the back seat. I thought I was bringing love. But when I stepped into my daughter's kitchen, soaked and smiling, I heard her say, "I hope she crashes." They laughed. I didn't. I left without a word. That was the day I stopped being a mother who waited and became a woman who remembered her own worth. The stiffness in my fingers had been getting worse lately. Some mornings I could barely wrap them around my coffee mug, but that didn't matter, not today. Today I had something important to do. My daughter Celeste was turning 48. We hadn't celebrated her birthday together in years. There was always some reason, a work trip, a scheduling conflict. One year, she forgot altogether and sent me a text 3 days later. But this time, I wasn't waiting for an invitation. I was going to surprise her. I spent 2 days preparing. The first day, I pulled out my old recipe box, the one with frayed corners and butter stains across the top. Inside, tucked between casseroles and cookie bars, was the card labeled Celeste's lemon chiffon cake. My handwriting looked younger, steadier back then. I read through it like a prayer. I got up before dawn the next day. My hands didn't want to cooperate, but I'd learned how to move through the pain. Slowly, deliberately. I separated egg yolks from whites, zested 3 lemons, folded everything gently so the cake would rise the way Celeste liked, light and just a bit tangy. I candied lemon slices for the top, arranging them in spirals so the cake looked like sunshine in a circle. By the time I was done, my fingers were swollen and my back ached, but the cake was perfect. And the thought of seeing her face when I showed up, that made every wince worth it. The next morning, I loaded the cake into the back seat of my old Ford, nestled it between 2 pillows. I packed my overnight bag, just in case she invited me to stay. I wore my best cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons, and brought the lavender hand cream she used to love when she was little. The car smelled of lemon, cinnamon coffee, and something else I couldn't name. Something like hope. It was just after 5 a.m. when I pulled out of my driveway. The sky was still dark, and the clouds hung low like they were waiting to cry. And cry they did. By the time I hit Harrisburg, the rain was coming down in sheets. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up. Water sprayed from the trucks ahead, and visibility was barely a blur of taillights. My fingers throbbed against the steering wheel. My joints stiffened more with every mile. But I kept going. I told myself the surprise would be worth it. I imagined Celeste opening the door, her face lighting up, that laugh she used to have bubbling out. "Mom, what are you doing here?" she'd say. And we'd hug, and she'd invite me in, and we'd eat the cake together just like we used to. 7 hours is a long time to dream about something. And I dreamed of it the entire way. When I finally pulled into her cul-de-sac, I felt like I'd been wrung out. The storm had slowed to a steady drizzle, and the light in her front window glowed soft and welcoming. I parked across the street. I didn't want her to see me coming. I wanted the moment to be a true surprise. Her front door was unlocked. I stepped inside, careful not to track too much water onto her beautiful floors. My coat was soaked through, my hands numb, but the cake was still intact in my arms. I could smell garlic and rosemary, something roasting in the oven. Laughter floated in from the kitchen, her voice, then his. I paused just for a moment, thinking how nice it was to hear her laugh. And then I heard the words. "I hope she crashes," Celeste said, her voice casual, like she was talking about the weather. Seriously, just one weekend without her guilt trips. I couldn't breathe. Darren's voice followed, low and amused. Or at least get lost. God, she's exhausting. They laughed, together, carefree, united in the punchline I had somehow become. My feet felt glued to the hardwood. I didn't know what to do. Confront them? Break down? Shout? Instead, I did something I don't think I'll ever fully understand. I walked quietly into the kitchen, just far enough to place the cake on the counter. I didn't look at them. I didn't say a word. Then I turned and walked back out into the rain. Each step felt heavier than the last, but I kept walking, out of the warmth of her house, away from the scent of rosemary, back into the cold and the storm. My car door closed with a soft click. I sat for a long moment staring through the rain-spattered windshield. The cake, my offering of love and memory, sat untouched on her counter. And my daughter had laughed while wishing I'd never made it. I started the engine, put the car in drive, and left. I didn't look back. I don't remember starting the car. I don't remember pulling away from the curb or how long I sat at that first red light just outside her neighborhood. All I remember is the dull hum in my ears and the way my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, not quite sure where I was going. Just away. Away from the house where my love had become a burden. Away from the laughter that had gutted me. I passed gas stations, diners, shopping plazas glowing with late afternoon light, each one offering the illusion of comfort. But I didn't stop until I saw a roadside motel, the kind with flickering neon signage and outdated curtains drawn tight across tiny windows. The vacancy sign blinked like a dare. I pulled in. The lobby smelled like old coffee and furniture polish. The man behind the desk barely looked up as I paid for one night in cash. Room 108, non-smoking, end of the hall. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, I leaned against it, still in my damp coat, and finally let the silence rush in. Not peace, no, not yet, but something close to stillness. My knees ached, my hands throbbed, but the pain in my chest, sharp, hollow, made everything else feel distant. I sat on the edge of the bed without taking off my shoes. The floral bedspread was cheerful in a forced kind of way, like a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. I stared at the wall for what must have been an hour, maybe more. My phone buzzed once in my purse, then again, and again. I didn't check it. I already knew who it was. I wasn't ready to hear more lies wrapped in concern. I wasn't ready for Celeste's voice saying, "You misunderstood," or "It was just a joke." Number I'd heard her clearly. "I hope she crashes." Those 4 words had detonated something inside me. Not just because they were cruel, but because they were said so easily, so lightly. Like I wasn't a person who had once sung her to sleep and sat through her school plays and driven cross-state to move her into her dorm. To wish me dead, casually, even humorously, was not just betrayal. It was erasure. So I sat there soaking wet and stiff with pain, and did something I hadn't done in years. I stopped pretending I was okay. Grief, when it finally came, didn't hit like a storm. It seeped in, slow and deliberate, like cold water finding cracks in a foundation. I thought about every moment that led me here. The birthdays missed, the thank you notes never sent, the phone calls that always ended too quickly, with that tight edge in Celeste's voice, like she was already moving on to something more important. The times I offered to visit and she'd say, "Let's wait until things settle down," knowing full well that things never did. At first, I blamed myself. Had I been too needy after Harold died? Too quiet? Too emotional? Too much of a shadow in her shiny, curated life? I had always tried to be the kind of mother who didn't intrude, who gave space, who stayed useful. I sent care packages, paid for house repairs when their budget was tight, gave them my old car when Darren's broke down, guaranteed a small loan when they wanted to redo their kitchen. They said it was temporary. They never paid it back. I told myself it was love. That helping was my job. That mothers are supposed to give more than they get. But sitting there in that motel room, with the hum of the mini fridge and the tap-tap of rain against the window, I saw it for what it really was. A transaction I hadn't realized I'd been participating in. Somewhere along the way, my love had stopped being seen as a gift and started being used as a resource. A convenience, a line of credit, both financial and emotional. And the worst part? I had allowed it, because I believed that if I just gave a little more, sent one more birthday card, offered one more loan, baked one more cake, they might finally see me again, not just as a mother, but as a person, someone worth loving back. I reached for my phone, not to check Celeste's messages, but to call someone who would tell me the truth without softening the edges. "Inez," I said when she answered, "I need your help." Her voice didn't skip a beat. "Where are you?" "Maryland, motel off Route 40. What happened?" "I heard Celeste. She said she hoped I'd crash, that I'd stop calling." 3 beats of silence, Then, "You ready to stop letting them treat you like an ATM in a sweater?" That was Inez. No sugarcoating, just truth, wrapped in fierce loyalty. "Yes," I whispered. "I think I finally am." "Good," she said. "Come home. We have work to do." And just like that, I had a direction again. Not back to Celeste, but forward. To myself. By the time I got home the next afternoon, the rain had followed me all the way up the turnpike. But it felt different now. Less like a storm, more like a long exhale. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes, watching the maple tree sway in the wind. Harold had planted that tree when Celeste was born, said it would grow right alongside her. It had. So had I. Bent, weathered, but still standing. Inside, the house smelled like lemon wood polish and old paper. I hadn't left the radio on. I hadn't left a light. But the stillness didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like permission. I took a hot shower and rubbed ointment into my aching hands. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and made a list. Not a grocery list, not a to-do list. A who am I if I'm not waiting on Celeste list. First on the list, Inez. She came over the next morning, armed with her laptop, her legal pad, and that sharp tongue I'd relied on more times than I could count. We'd known each other since our early teaching days, back when I still wore heels and she still had patience. She'd gone into financial advising after retiring. I went into quiet heartbreak. But today we were in the same room again, for the same reason, to build a new life. We went through every document I had, every loan, every co-signature, every account where I'd let myself be just a backup, just in case. There were more than I remembered. 4 credit cards in Celeste and Darren's names, all tied to my credit score. 1 personal loan for $20,000 I had guaranteed temporarily 2 years ago. A home equity line that, unbeknownst to me, Celeste had refinanced with my name still attached, and a pending loan application for a lake house project Darren had pitched to his parents, using my financial records as part of the package. Inez shook her head as she scanned the files. "They've turned your love into leverage, Mar. That's not family. That's a business plan." I let them. "You trusted them. That's not a crime. But staying silent now might be." We spent 2 days untangling everything. Inez called in a lawyer she trusted. We started with the basics. I removed myself from every financial guarantee and co-account. We notified their credit companies that I was no longer willing to underwrite. I closed the shared emergency fund I'd kept in case they ever needed a bridge. I redirected my estate, rewriting my will completely. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Colleen, asked me plainly, "Where do you want your assets to go?" I took a breath. "To the local women's shelter, and to an education fund for girls from our district." "And Celeste?" she asked. "My journals, my recipe box, and a letter. That's it." "Petty?" "No," I said, steady as steel. "Proof of who I was and what I gave." Colleen nodded. "Done." By the end of the week, my name was off every document I'd once believed was about love. I wasn't angry anymore, not even sad. I was awake. The fallout began on a Tuesday. First, a voicemail from Darren. "Hi, Marlena. Hey, we think there's a glitch with the joint credit line. Celeste said maybe you could check?" His voice strained to stay casual. I didn't return the call. Wednesday, a text from Celeste. "Mom, our mortgage company is saying there's a signature missing on the renewal. Did something happen?" Yes, I thought. I happened. By Thursday, Inez had forwarded me a copy of a panicked email Celeste sent to her banker. The credit limits had dropped. Interest rates had climbed. Their debt-to-income ratio had triggered an automatic flag. The house they were planning to buy near the lake? On hold, pending reassessment. They started calling every day. Different numbers, some blocked, some from mutual friends. I kept my phone on silent. Each message followed the same rhythm. Concern, confusion, desperation. Then came the tone shift. "Why are you doing this to us? You've always been unstable when you're upset. This isn't like you. We're worried about your mental state." And finally, Darren's favorite card to play. "This could ruin us." Is that really what you want? I wanted peace. I wanted clarity. I wanted to stop paying, emotionally, financially, for a relationship that only took. They didn't understand that this wasn't punishment. It was a correction. They had built their dreams on a foundation I never agreed to pour. And now that it was cracking, they were blaming the weather. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat in the quiet, and smiled. For the first time in days, not out of triumph, but out of relief. I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was done. It took me a few weeks to notice the absence, not the absence of Celeste's voice or Darren's texts. Those I didn't miss. What I noticed instead was the absence of tension, of waiting, of wondering if I should call, if I was being too much, if this birthday would finally be the one they remembered without prompting. In its place, there was space, not just on my calendar, but in my chest. The first thing I did with that space was say yes to an invitation I'd been dodging for years. A quilting circle at the library, run by a group of women who always reminded me of coffee, competence, and quiet power. I used to think I didn't have time. Now I realized I'd just been holding my time for people who didn't want it. The first meeting, my stitches were crooked, and I poked myself more times than I care to admit. But the laughter around the table was gentle and real. No one asked what I'd brought. They just made space for me. That same week, I joined a hiking group for women over 65. The pace was slow, so were the stories. But the sunlight through the trees, the way the conversation rose and fell with the crunch of leaves. There was a kind of belonging in that rhythm. No obligation, no expectation, just presence. I started volunteering twice a week at the local literacy center. On my third visit, I was paired with a woman named Nora. She was about my age, a former nurse raising 2 grandsons. Quick wit, warm eyes, no patience for nonsense. We clicked immediately. "You ever painted?" she asked one afternoon as we cleaned up the classroom. "Painted?" I scoffed. "Only by number." "Well," she said, sliding a flyer into my hand, "we're about to change that." By the end of the month, I had a new set of watercolor brushes, a shelf full of books I'd been meaning to read for years, and 3 real friends who didn't care how much I'd given, or how much I still could. I was not mourning anymore. I was replanting. When my 73rd birthday came, I baked a new version of the lemon chiffon cake, lighter, zestier, infused with ginger and a hint of thyme. It was a recipe entirely my own. I brought it to the women's shelter with a handwritten note, from someone who finally remembered her own worth. They cut it into slices and passed it around the table while I stayed to chat. Laughter filled the room like warm bread rising. For once, I didn't wish Celeste was there. I didn't imagine what she would say. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, surrounded by women who saw me, not what I could offer, but who I was. It was 2 months later when I got the card. Postmarked from Celeste's town, no return address. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, precise, deliberate, like the girl who used to color inside the lines just to prove she could. Inside was a single sentence. "I'm seeing a therapist. I know I have things to face. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to try." No excuses, no blame, no mention of money, just a door. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to crumple it. Part of me wanted to call her immediately. But what I did instead was pour a cup of tea and sit with the weight of it. Trying, I'd learned, didn't always mean changing, but it was a start. I waited 2 days before writing back. I kept it short. "I'm open to talking, but only if it's about us, not what I can do for you. If we're going to build anything, it has to be built on truth." Her reply came a week later, this time a phone call. I almost let it go to voicemail. But then I picked up. "Hi, Mom," she said. I didn't respond right away, just listened. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry, not just for what I said, but for how I've treated you for a long time. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'd like to earn one." Her voice cracked a little, like she wasn't used to asking for things without strings. I took a breath. "I'm willing to talk, Celeste, but things will be different." "I know," she said. That's why I'm calling. We didn't make plans. We didn't set a schedule. We just sat on the line for a few more minutes, silent except for the breathing. No demands, no performance, just two women standing on either side of a door, seeing if it could open without breaking. When Celeste called again, it was the middle of the afternoon, a few weeks after her last message. I was outside, pulling weeds from the flower beds Harold had built with railroad ties decades ago. I let the call go to voicemail. I wasn't screening her, not exactly. I just needed to finish what I'd started with my hands in the dirt. Later, I listened to her message, sitting at the kitchen table with dirt still under my fingernails. Hi, Mom. I have some news. I'm pregnant, due in February. I thought you should know, because, well, it changes everything, or at least it might. There was a pause. I want to do things differently. I want to be different. I know I've hurt you. If you'd be willing to talk in person, I'd like that. I didn't cry. Instead, I stood up, washed my hands, and called her back. 2 days later, I met her at a cafe halfway between our towns. She arrived first. She looked tired, a little older than I remembered, but her eyes were softer. She stood when I entered. Hi, Mom. Celeste. We ordered tea, sat across from each other like women who used to know each other better. For a few minutes, we didn't say much, and then she began. I've been in therapy for a while now. At first, it was because everything was falling apart. The lake house, the credit cards, Darren spiraling. But the more I talked, the more I realized it wasn't just the money. She looked down, tracing her fingers along the edge of the mug. I resented you for being alone after Dad died, for needing me, for reminding me of the parts of myself I wanted to outrun. I turned you into a mirror I didn't want to face. I said nothing. She continued. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I want you to know I see it now, what I did, what I let Darren do, the way we treated you, not just like a backup plan, but like insulation, from real responsibility, from guilt. There it was, truth, unearned yet, but real. I'm not asking for money, she added quickly, or guarantees, just maybe a place to start again. I nodded, slowly. Here's what I need, I said. If I'm in your life, it has to be real, not transactional, not seasonal. You call because you want to. You visit because it matters, and you don't ask me to carry your weight when it gets heavy. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't speak. She just reached across the table and took my hand. It was small, fragile, not a fix, but a beginning. Months passed. Celeste called every Sunday, sometimes just to say hello. We met for lunch once a month. No talk of finances, no subtle strings. When the baby shower was planned, she asked me to attend, but told me she'd understand if I couldn't. I went, not for her, for the tiny life she was about to bring into the world. A new beginning, not yet burdened by history. When her daughter was born, a red-faced, wailing miracle with a full head of dark hair, I visited the hospital with a stuffed elephant and a card. No gifts that could be cashed, just presents. She handed me the baby without hesitation. This is Eliza, she whispered. She has your hands. I looked down at the tiny fingers curled around mine, and for the first time in years, I let myself hope, not for things to go back to how they were, but for something better to begin. A year passed. Celeste and I spoke more regularly, not every day, not always easily, but honestly. There were awkward silences and some backslides, moments when old habits tried to reclaim their place. But each time we recalibrated, each time we started over. Darren never quite came around. He was polite, measured, but I could see in his eyes that the loss of my financial usefulness had cut deeper than my absence ever had. That was fine. I wasn't rebuilding with him. I was rebuilding with myself. The house, once filled with waiting and what-ifs, now held color and activity. The walls bore watercolors I'd painted with Nora, sunsets and mountains, imperfect but mine. The bookshelves were heavier than ever. The kitchen counter often held baked goods for the shelter. I still made the lemon chiffon cake, but now with ginger, thyme, and a secret I never wrote down. One afternoon in early spring, I carried that cake to the women's shelter. I placed it on the table like a centerpiece and taped a note beside it, from someone who finally remembered her own worth. The staff clapped. The women smiled. One asked for the recipe. I said it wasn't written. It was lived. As I walked back to my car, a light drizzle began to fall. I tilted my face toward it, letting the drops land gently on my cheeks. The rain didn't sting anymore. It didn't blur my vision or make me feel lost. It felt like a benediction. At 73, I had finally learned that love is not sacrifice without end, that respect is not optional, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away, and that the most loving thing you can do is come back, only on your own terms. As I turned the key in the ignition, my phone buzzed. A photo from Celeste, Eliza, now crawling in a yellow sweater I'd knit by hand. The caption read, "She reached for the cake on the counter. Lemon's her favorite." I smiled, not for her approval, not for permission, but for the life I'd rebuilt. Not in spite of the storm, because of it.